Reflections from Torch Trust, focusing on Christian faith and sight loss.
Hello and a warm welcome to Reflections from Torch Trust, the show that focuses on faith and disability in today's world. I'm your host, Marilyn Baker, and it's wonderful to have you with us today. 2 weeks ago, we were joined by the wonderful Ella Abel, who spoke with reporter Lynn Davies about what it was like to begin losing her sight in her 30s. Today, we're catching up with Ella and Lynn again, as Ella takes us through the next part of her story, including how her faith has helped her along the way, as well as how sight loss has affected her church life.
As a woman of faith, what was that like when you lost your sight? Were you ever angry with God? Did you ever feel like you had been let down? What was your experience?
So at first, and when I say at first, I mean like for the first year, I knew God was with me. And that was such comfort when it was such a difficult time. But as I have kind of learned all the practical things I've needed to sort of cobble together, a life that I can start to enjoy again, that's when my emotions have hit me, the actual kind of loss. Because I've spent so much time, handling all the practical things, getting all the help I needed, that it was only when I was like, okay, my house is in order. Now I can deal with all the emotions and all the questions that come with sight loss. And I'll tell you what is really difficult about being a Christian and sight loss. Blindness is so often used as a metaphor in the Bible and in church. And most of the time, that's not a problem. But on a bad day, that is like a sucker punch. And I've had, I guess, all the usual questions like that come with any kind of suffering. Why does God let this happen? And honestly, it can feel quite personal. I think that's a difficult thing. If you're kind of stumbling from one problem to another, because I acquired some other disabilities along with sight loss too. But what is wonderful is that despite my questions and my anger and my sadness, underneath it all, God's existence doesn't rely on how I feel. Even my relationship with him doesn't rely on how I feel. Jesus loves me. He gave his own life so he could have a relationship with me. Me being angry at what I'm going through doesn't change that. Quite the opposite. Jesus knows suffering because he chose to go through it himself. And he doesn't push people aside who are suffering too. In fact, he got angry when he saw people being mistreated. He was affected when his friend Lazarus died. He wept. He healed the sick. He even healed the blind. Now, I'm not saying I'm expecting my sight to be healed this side of eternity, for all sorts of reasons. But I know what he's promised me, and that's eternity with him and full restoration.
That's really wonderful to hear, like how your faith has been so strong through it all, because it is a lot to go through, and it would be very understandable for somebody to maybe turn their back on their faith. But sometimes faith is the thing that keeps you going and keeps you sane in a way. It could be like an anchoring. And if that anchoring wasn't there, maybe it would have been even harder.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I have very much tried to pull that anchor out and throw it away. Like, that's why I think, I don't know if I can really emphasize enough, my faith is not reliant on me. It's really a gift from God.
Last Wednesday, as well as being Ash Wednesday, was also Valentine's Day. So for this episode Thought for the Week, we've decided to share a reflection on love and St. Valentine himself. It was written by a friend of Torch, Stephen Richards, and is read by James Brookman.
February, the month of St. Valentine's Day. Hardly anything is known about Valentine himself. It's believed he was a Christian martyr who was buried on the 14th of February, 269 AD. Evidently, the romantic celebration that we recognise came about in the 14th century and is linked to Geoffrey Chaucer. Anyway, whoever St. Valentine was, I personally should be grateful. It was a particular Valentine's Day, some years ago, that my now wife sent me 2 Valentine cards. The first was signed cryptically PFD 269M. In the second, she used her Christian name, which was just as well because the cryptic one was lost on me. It was actually her car registration. I took the hint and we started going out. As they say, the rest is history. The Bible frequently uses the concept of declared love, consummated marriage, and faithfulness when speaking of God's love for people. In the Old Testament, God likens himself to a husband having to deal with a wayward wife, that is, his chosen people Israel. In the role of husband, God is seen to be justly jealous and angry when his wife goes after other lovers, foreign gods or idols. When his people are faithless, however, God remains faithful. In the New Testament, God develops and broadens this theme. He is seen as a father choosing a bride for his much-loved and only son. The bridegroom is, of course, Jesus. But who is the bride to be? She is not just one individual, but many. Bride, in this context, is a corporate name given to include all men and women who declare their love for Jesus and, by God's grace, intend to worship and obey him, forsaking all other gods. The bride, as defined here, is what is meant by the term the church. It took 2 Valentine cards to alert me to my wife's love towards me. For many of us, God's declaration in the Old Testament can, at first sight, appear cryptic. In the New Testament, however, it is as though he signed his declaration of love with his name, Jesus. Next month will include Holy Week, the week leading up to Easter, where we see demonstrated the lengths that Jesus was prepared to go to in order to secure his bride. Whether or not you receive a Valentine card this year, here is a declaration of love paraphrased from the New Testament, and may it be a blessing for you. From 1 John chapter 4 verse 10. We see real love, not in the fact that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to make personal atonement for our wrongdoings. Do you feel able to insert your own name where it says us, and the word my where it says ours? If you can, then these words are indeed a personal declaration of God's love for you.
You're listening to Reflections, and we're speaking with Ella Abel about her personal experiences of sight loss and her deep-rooted sense of faith.
How has it been to get back into church life after you had sight loss?
So that's still something that I'm figuring out. And that's where Torch Trust has been absolutely invaluable. So things like being paired up with someone if I'm serving can be a really helpful thing, but instead of it being just one person, have a minimum of 3 so that no one feels overburdened and becomes resentful. And it makes so much sense when you mentioned that to me. And it's that kind of like lived experience and having thought through how that could benefit other people that's been so valuable to me. And my church have been wonderful about things like providing me with copies of the song words, and I've had friends offer to give me lifts. But actually, what I'm finding is that to really be involved with church, you have to have quite a healthy body, because so much about church is serving in ways that you need working hands and feet and eyes and energy. And that's something that I've been praying about and trying to see what church could possibly do to make life a little bit easier for people like me, so that the relationships I have with people at church aren't overburdened because I need a little bit of extra help here and there. So things like, it would be wonderful if church had transport available. That would benefit so many people, who may not have a car, who maybe can no longer drive. It kind of makes people equal without having to test their friendships so much with asking them to go out of their way. And also with niceness being such a big part of Christian culture, people won't accept money for petrol. People won't say if they're having a difficult day, and actually they'd probably wouldn't be going to church unless they had to take you, and that upsets them a bit. It's just an added stressor that I think, if removed, could really make church much more accessible to so many people.
Yeah, it's that honesty, isn't it? Because you really don't want to be the person who makes someone go to church just because they feel like they have to drive you there. And being nice, actually, sometimes also means being nice to yourself, and that means being honest. And it's actually a far nicer thing to say, look, I would love to take you, but I'm not feeling very well, so I'm not going to be able to go to church today. Maybe you could ask so-and-so, for example. Something similar happened to me where somebody, this was not actually church related, but it was a little bit similar with the fact that they were taking me somewhere. And I did ask if they wanted petrol money, and they said no. And then they got angry with me for not paying petrol money. So it's kind of like, decide, please, just be upfront with me. Like, I know I'm asking for something, and I would rather you being honest, because that's just being nice to you and me. Even if it might not sound like you're being nice when you're being honest, you are actually being far nicer saying no than saying yes, if that is what you should be saying in that instance.
Ella's interview with Lynn was originally recorded for Torch's podcast Insights, which explores how churches can become more sight loss friendly, and features some great interviews with blind and partially sighted people. The complete catalogue of Insight episodes is available to listen to on our website. Just head to torchtrust.org, click Living with Sight Loss in the top menu, and select Radio and Podcasts from the drop-down menu. Let's hear the final part of Ella and Lynn's conversation now.
Is there anything else you would say to somebody, let's say they have someone in their church who has sight loss? What would you say to them? Like, if they came and asked, how can I best help this person and make them feel welcome?
First of all, get some training. Get some training in sight loss awareness and disability awareness, because you can't expect a person to educate you while they're trying to learn themselves. And then see them as a person first, and a person who is valuable and who has something to offer. Don't just see them as a drain on resources or someone who only needs help, because that will impact absolutely everything. And that attitude, and by that I mean, if you feel sorry for a person, you're going to go beyond what you're comfortable with occasionally in order to help them. And that's exactly when we end up in the situation that we were just talking about, with someone offering you a lift and you offering to pay, them saying no, and them later getting angry about it. So yeah, just remember that they are a person who is valuable, who has a lot to contribute, but also if they're asking for help or they're asking for something, don't make them go through all the reasons why. It shouldn't be necessary to disclose such personal things as disability and how it impacts you in order to get the help that you need. That is an extremely vulnerable position to put yourself into, and being visibly disabled means that you're always in a vulnerable position because other people can see that you need help. Here's an example of what being blind in church is like, and the all the ways it could be very irritating for me. So because I'm visually impaired, and if I start making notes on my phone in a sermon, I forget that other people aren't visually impaired, and at the size at which I write, people can read them. So I once had a couple behind me tell me, "Oh, you write your notes so quickly, I couldn't write half that fast." And that just shocked me because, sometimes I might write personal things in my notes when I'm listening to a sermon. And that means I have a layer of privacy that's removed from me. And what's really helpful in that kind of situation is a London attitude, which is pretend you can't see. That's why I love the tube, because you can sit down on that tube and you can be reading a book or having a good cry, and other people will just pretend you don't exist unless something bad happens, and then people jump in to help. So yeah, more of a London attitude would be wonderful.
I second that. I really do.
I'm sorry to say that we're all out of time for today. We do love to hear from our listeners, so if you've got a comment, song, request or suggestion for a feature or a future episode, then do get in touch. The number to call is 01858 438 260. That's 01858 438 260, or you can email info@torchtrust.org. Until next week, from me, Marilyn, and everyone on the Reflections team, goodbye and God bless.
You've been listening to Reflections from Torch Trust.